This episode of the podcast is sponsored by our friends at Five Wives Vodka and Podcasting is Easy. We're going to be telling you more about them throughout this episode.
All right, let's welcome everybody out to a brand new episode of I Am Salt Lake Podcast. If this is your first time here, and I know there's a couple of you out there, and you're like, what is this podcast I'm about to listen to? What is this podcast all about? Well, this podcast is all about showcasing awesome people right here in Salt Lake City. We're talking to musicians, authors, business owners, food truck owners, breweries, distilleries. I think you guys get the idea. We're talking to anyone that might have a cool story to share. Let's welcome everybody out today to episode 372. My name is Chris. I am sitting across the table looking at my co-host, Christina. How are you doing over there?
I'm doing so good. I really enjoyed talking to this guest. We got to sit down this week and chat with Cynthia Fleming from the Salt Lake Acting Company. We got to find out what got her into theater and what eventually led her to Salt Lake Acting Company.
Really great story. So honored to get her on the podcast. We're recording today in beautiful downtown Salt Lake City in our podcast studio, which is located in the back of Empire Merchandise. Empire Merchandise is located at 680 South State Street. And not only does Empire have an amazing selection of vape juice and vape accessories, but this is where you can actually come and purchase your very own I Am Salt Lake podcast t-shirt. So stop on in, check it out, and pick up a t-shirt while you're here.
We want to personally extend our invitation to all of you to come join our Facebook group if you haven't yet. We have an amazing community of listeners, and we would love you to be a part of it as well. You can find the group by searching for I Am Salt Lake Community inside of Facebook, or you can just type iamsaltlake.com/group, and that will forward you right to the Facebook group.
Before we get into this conversation with Cynthia, I want to tell you about one of our awesome affiliate partners that we work with, HostGator. If you are unfamiliar with what HostGator is, HostGator, I believe, is truly the best web hosting service provider, whatever you want to call it, out there. And let me tell you why. Okay, we chat with a lot of businesses on this podcast, and we find out that a lot of you don't have a website. You feel that, well, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, I'm on social media. Why do I need a website? Well, you need your own space on the web. Having your own website allows that. What if Facebook was to close down tomorrow? What if Twitter was to close down tomorrow? How are your customers going to be able to find you? Hey, that's where a website comes in. Head on over to HostGator.com, grab yourself a website, but use the promo code Salt Lake. This is going to give you 30% off of your very first month. Or sign up for 2 years, save yourself 50%. You're supporting the podcast. You're getting a discount on your website. HostGator.com is where you need to go. Use the promo code Salt Lake and grab yourself 30% off your first month of hosting with them. All right, let's jump into that conversation that we had with Cynthia Fleming when she came and sat down with us to share her story. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the conversation. Where did you grow up? Did you grow up here in Salt Lake City, or where did all that magic happen for you?
I grew up in Bountiful, Utah, and my father's parents came from Lebanon to Bountiful. And to look at me, you're going
straight to Bountiful?
Huh?
Straight to Bountiful from
No,
Lebanon.
actually, I think my grandfather's cousin or brother, sorry, might have stopped in Washington, D.C. area. And then for some reason, my grandfather came back out west and he worked at Kennecott Mines.
Oh.
And he heard about there might be a farm, some farming in Bountiful. And that's how he got there. And he was quite an entrepreneur as well, kind of, I don't know if he really found himself, but he had 4 sons and 4 daughters, and they all were extremely successful. And my grandmother was 16 when she married him, and he came out first, and then she joined him. Oh, actually, they first, before Bountiful, they had a dress shop in Salt Lake City.
How cool is that?
Oh, and
really cool.
This is all coming back to me.
No, you're good.
I'm at an art gallery, 2nd South and 5th West. And my dad, we had some relatives in town, and we were driving, and it was right after I saw reading at this art gallery. And my dad points and said, that's where my house was, where I grew up in Salt Lake City. And I'm like, what? I had just sat there last week, not knowing that you had grown up. That's where they were born. So they first were in Salt Lake City before they went to Bountiful. And
so you've seen a lot of change in this city throughout the years.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes we'll bring people on that maybe have only lived in the area for, say, even 5 or 10 years.
Yes.
But you've been here for a minute. You've seen a lot of change.
Well, all I want to do is get out of Utah. My whole life as a child, I knew there was more, and I never felt like I fit in. So I finally did get out in the late 70s.
And you got out because you got into theater, right?
Yes. Yeah.
What even got you into theater?
So my mother, here I am, 7 years old, very tall, pigeon-toed, gawky, and my mother was Miss Utah. As a matter of fact, my dad emceed the Miss Utah pageant that my mom won.
Is that how they met?
That's how they met.
Oh, cute.
So my mother had told my grandmother when they were at the contest, she pointed at my dad and said, that's the trophy I want to bring home. And she did,
Wow.
So anyway, imagine being Miss Utah, and she was beautiful and perfect. And then this daughter, this pigeon-toed and gawky, and also I'm blonde, and, a lot of my Lebanese relatives and being tall and blonde, it's like they would look at me and go, well, she carries herself well. I was really kind of plopped down into this world that I felt like I didn't belong. But my mom did give me the gift. She heard ballet would help me being pigeon-toed. And there was a dance school that was in a small little house that the American Legion meetings would be held. And Rocky Spolstra taught it. He was part of Ballet West, which at that time was Utah Civic Ballet. And so it's very strict, and nobody danced in those days. Now, children are growing up.
There's dance classes everywhere.
Yes. Yeah. And they're coming out of the womb performing nowadays, and they come from these functional households. And I kind of was glad. I do come from a functional household the best you could of that generation, but a lot of us in theater found each other because we didn't feel like we fit in. We were lost. Anyway, the ballet, which I kept a secret until I was in junior high, gave me a purpose in a sense. And then my teacher said, and all my friends were always little tiny girls, and my teacher said that she would be the prima ballerina and I would be the featured dancer. And not knowing that that's pretty good. But at that time, I'm going, why am I working so hard that I can only be featured? And that's when I saw Sweet Charity, the musical, and Bob Fosse's dancing. And I was like, that's me.
That's what you want to do.
Yes. And so I was very shy. I could hardly say my name. And now I want to be a musical theater where you have to sing, you have to dance, and you have to act. And luckily, another beautiful thing about Utah, my mother enrolls me in a summer dance camp up at the University of Utah where they introduced us to modern ballet, character dancing, and jazz dancing, which Roland Butler taught. And he just passed away a couple of years ago, and he is the reason why I had any career in musical theater.
So how old were you when all this was happening, when you were getting into, you said 7?
So I started at 7, and then the dance camp was at 12.
At 12. Mm-hmm. And then it wasn't obviously until you were 18 that you started touring with the theater, right? Like, I don't know how to really get.
Where's the transition from dance to theater?
Yeah.
Right.
Like what got you into all of that?
So, I went to the University of Utah, and they, at that time, because of Roland Butler, they had this cool program where you could be a ballet major, a theater major, a music major with a musical theater emphasis. So I started as a ballet major with a musical theater emphasis. And what the cool thing is, Roland got every department to talk to each other. So that's impossible. And I've been lucky enough that I did teach a class up at the university, but that could never happen now.
Sure.
And so who I could not sing, I'm taking singing lessons from Naomi Farr, who teaches opera, who teaches like the opera students, and here I really had terrible pitch. And then Roland also introduced us to a dance school in LA, Roland Dupre Dance Academy. And the teachers from them would come up and teach us. And then Pioneer Theater, as we know it now, was Pioneer Memorial Theater. And they hired a lot of students in their musicals, a lot of community actors, and maybe one or two New York or out-of-state actor. And I was paid my tuition every time I was in a play. And we were on a quarter at that time. And that inspired, and we'll go forward, Salt Lake Acting Company's University Professional Theater program from that experience. But so I got all this amazing training. When I was a freshman in college, I became friends with my first gay friend, Kurt Thompson.
Here in Utah, who I finally felt I have a true friend. Sure. Because growing up in Bountiful and not being Mormon and
it was a challenge.
Yeah. And women and young girls in those days, it's not this kind of like we're all in it together. Mm-hmm. We never were in it together. And
where did you meet him at?
He was in the theater department. Oh, so I changed from a ballet major to a theater major because I was thin, but they wanted me to lose about 20 more pounds. And of course, your freshman year, you gain weight. Oh, and then they jumping you so much, the teacher that I had. And so I got shin splints. And I realized I can take as many dance classes as I want being a theater major. So I became a theater major. And Kurt, so my maiden name is Fidel. And so I was Cynthia Fidel at that time. And because Kurt and I were such special friends, we had nicknames for each other. So he started calling me Thea, the last part of Cynthia. And so I told him, when I become professional, I will be Thea Fidel. I used to practice my autograph. And so when I got into a chorus line, I actually had my headshot and Cynthia Fidel was on there and I blacked out the CYN. So that's when I became Thea Fidel for a while.
Very cool. What was do you remember the very first theater production you were in?
Yes. At the university, I had to audition the summer before I was a freshman, I believe. And it was Kismet. And they had the original woman that worked with Jack Cole on the choreography. So we had the original Jack Cole choreography and I had to move my head from side to side. And Roland is one who told us all about it and told us what we had to do. So I had to practice because my neck would not move that way. So I practiced and practiced and practiced. And then I got into that play and looking back on it now, I of course would never even put myself into the play because we put Texas dirt all over us so we could be brown. And yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. It was a lot in those days. I mean, that's still unfortunately happening, but from the last 5 to 10 years.
But it was very culturally accepted then.
It
right?
was, but I look back
and you
on
didn't
it
know
now.
Any better?
Nobody knew any better. But anyway, it was an amazing experience.
I could imagine. So when did it, you know what, actually, let's take a break here.
Okay.
Play a couple of messages here from our sponsors. And then I want to get into like kind of what it was like to tour with the theater. Because I imagine that would be a little rough on life. But we'll get into that when we come back. So hang tight. It's that time of the podcast where we take just a couple of minutes of your time and tell you about our awesome sponsors. Now, remember, when you support our sponsors, you're supporting the podcast. So support a sponsor, keep our lights on. Hey, this episode of the podcast is sponsored by the very local, the very delicious, and the very tasty Five Wives Vodka. The next time you head on over to the state liquor store, pick up a bottle, pick up an extra bottle for your neighbor. Or the next time you head on over to your local bar, ask for Five Wives Vodka by name, because if you didn't know by now, every time you take a shot of Five Wives Vodka, you are supporting this podcast. There are 3 different flavors. Christina and I are going to tell you about them here. They have the original. This is the one made from Utah mountain spring water. It's 100% distilled corn spirit, and it's gluten-free. It's interesting because the spring is hidden in beautiful Ogden Canyon, which makes it inaccessible by vehicle, So they're hiking this water out 5 gallons at a time.
And if you like a little more flavor in your vodka, they also make Sinful. Five Wives Sinful is a flavored vodka with a delicious cinnamon taste. And it's not like other cinnamon products that give you that cinnamon candy taste. Sinful is like a morning cinnamon roll, and it only has 76 calories per ounce.
There's also the Five Wives Heavenly. This is another one of their flavored vodka, but this one has that delicious vanilla taste. Heavenly's rich, buttery vanilla flavor, it comes through without coating your taste buds with sugar, and this results in more vanilla and less calories. Head on over to their website, fivewivesvodka.com. This is where you can find out more about them, find out their history. I think there might even be some recipes there. But like I said in the beginning, just head on over to the state liquor store, grab a couple bottles. You never know when you might need one.
It's always great to bring one to a friend's house when you're visiting, right?
Exactly. Or just head on over to your local bar and ask for Five Wives Vodka by name. And many thanks to Five Wives Vodka for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. And cheers, right, guys?
Clink.
All right, this episode is also sponsored by Podcasting is Easy, which you can find at podcastingiseasy.com. I know there's a lot of listeners. You are looking to possibly launch a podcast. Maybe you already do a podcast and you're like, I don't have time to edit my podcast. I don't have time to market my podcast. That's where we come in at Podcasting is Easy. This is actually Christina and I's company. I handle all the podcast editing. I handle the podcast marketing. I will also coach you on how to start a podcast.
And I'm kind of the nerd behind the computer for you guys. So if you need artwork or a podcast website, that's what I'm here for. There's so many different aspects to podcasting that we really are able to cover all the bases to help you out.
Head on over to podcastingiseasy.com. We actually have a really cool resources link. It's going to give you some great information on equipment you might need to buy to start a podcast, maybe even where to host your podcast. It's right there. Or better yet, you can schedule a free 15-minute phone call with us where we will figure out if we can help you get this podcast launched, or if we'll figure out if maybe I can help you edit your podcast, whatever it takes, right, to get this podcast going and launched and out for the public ears to consume. So with that being said, many thanks to Podcasting is Easy for sponsoring this podcast. Let's jump right back into that conversation that we had with Cynthia Fleming. Enjoy. You were mentioning wanting to get out of Utah in the beginning as a young child. I'm sure your teenage years. Well, that was where I was going to lead up to. Was that the opportunity to start touring with a theater? Because you did that for a while.
Yeah, with the chorus line. I moved to LA first, and then I got into it. Well, my question is, was that one of the reasons you jumped into that? Because you're like, oh my gosh, this is my opportunity out of Utah. What was the reasoning there? Or did you just think that was part of what you needed to do as if you were involved with theater? Does that make sense? I don't know.
Yeah. Like, was it an opportunity for you to leave, or was it? I know what you're saying.
Yeah, I left first.
Okay.
So I can talk a little about how I finally did get out.
Well, how did you get out? What is your secret?
This sounds the escape plan.
What happened was I felt that I was getting the parts or getting involved in the theater, like everything I auditioned for here, I would get it. And all of a sudden I had this gut feeling that I literally hurt that I had to get out of Utah, and now's the time. And I wanted to move to LA and be near that dance studio that Roland Butler opened our eyes to. So I told my mother I want to move to LA, and we packed up a car. My brothers drove me out, and I got an apartment near the dance studio, and I was taking 5 or 6 dance classes a day. And then I would sometimes take an acting class or singing. And I had little jobs here and there. And after a year, my mother said, who was paying for my apartment, said, you've got to get work or you have to come home. And I'm like, I'm not coming home.
you didn't want to come back to Utah.
I did not want to come back to Utah.
Did you feel like a lot of the reason was that you kind of like hit the glass ceiling in Utah? Like you couldn't continue to grow as a performer?
I think I did. It was interesting. It was like, I felt that it's now time for me to really get paid for doing this, you know?
Yeah.
And you felt like you couldn't do that here.
Right. And luckily, my parents, they should have, had one more year to finish my degree and I didn't do it because I was like, I just need to get out. And they just supported that, which was great.
That's really amazing.
I know. And so I started auditioning and I got into this Hollywood dancing show, did that. And while I'm doing the Hollywood dancing, a chorus line auditions. And now it's 1979. A chorus line is 4 years old. I said, it's a really old show and I probably don't fit in, but I've got to audition, right? And I had absolutely nothing to lose. And there were 150, they had 2 days of 150 girls auditioning. And it started at 10 o'clock in the morning and you first had to state your name and do a time step, double pirouette, and then you were kept or not. Then we did a ballet combination and then I was kept. And then they did the jazz combination and I'm like, I might have a chance with this. So then all of a sudden I started kicking in a little bit of the nerves because before I had no nerves. And then they only kept 10 of us to sing at the very end. And now it's 6 o'clock at night. And singing out of all my talents was my weakest. And I started to sing my song and they stopped me after about 5 notes. And I'm like, yeah, right, fine. But then they said, would you go over to the piano and sing Music in the Mirror? And Music in the Mirror is Cassie's song. And Music in the Mirror is something that I just completely relate to because it's all about just being I could rehearse and I still am the same. I could rehearse every single day, every day of my life. I love just the rehearsal process. I love working towards something. All I need is the music in the mirror and the chance to dance. It was just so me. So I sang and this sound came out that I've never really heard before. It was like good. So anyway, I was the only one hired out of the 300 girls. Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
Well, scared. Okay. I've always been I'm always more comfortable and I've been working on this all my life. So I've really worked on when the opportunity came for me to be in the leadership of Salt Lake Acting Company to be like, okay, comfortable with that. Instead of I'm really used to just working really hard to get there. I was more comfortable trying to get there than getting
Actually being there.
Yeah.
That challenge of getting there.
Yeah.
Well, and it's something, it keeps you motivated. And once you've kind of hit something that you've been aspiring for, you're like, oh, what do I do now? Like, what do you do?
Yes. And you kind of feel then all the insecurities come in. Am I good enough?
Imposter syndrome kicks in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All of that. It was great. I started as an understudy. And so you had to learn I had at that time 3 roles. I do have 4 under my belt. But it was touring. People took vacations. People got sick. So we went on a lot. So the experience was everything. And then we went to San Francisco and then we were going to do some shorter tours and we were going to go to Salt Lake City. And I told my mom, and this is 81 when the Capitol Theater just was renovated. One of the first, I don't know how many renovations it's been through, but I told my mom, I can't go to Salt Lake being an understudy. So if I don't get on the line, I will go to New York. And I had $2,000. And she's like, fine.
Wow.
I can't believe that.
What a cool mom.
I know. But luckily, the auditions for Judy Turner was it was like the Army because there was like 3 tours in the city, in the nation. And so we were like the Army. They would ship us to the national tour or the international tour or this. So the Judy Turner was being moved to some place else and we had auditions. And so I got Judy Turner before Salt Lake City. So wow. I stayed. So.
Was that hard being on the road all the time? That's what I'm curious of. Like sometimes I'll go like even a road trip, a 3-day road trip or something, to me, that's a long time. Like, yeah. Like, did you ever feel like, gosh, I need to just establish roots somewhere?
Well, I think I was young enough that I didn't know any difference. Yeah. And I was so excited to have this job, but I did quit a few times and then they would call me back, but it has affected. Once I finally moved back to Utah, it has affected me in the fact that I don't really, the need to travel now
isn't so much.
Yeah. So it's like I felt like I got it out of my system. I didn't get to go internationally as I'd hoped because I was asked to go to the New York company, and I stayed in New York. I was in the show from 84 to 90. So a lot of the touring was happening while I was in New York, but it kind of made me feel like just getting roots somewhere and being happy, being grounded, you know, that way.
It is good to kind of get it out when you're a little bit younger and go explore and really chase everything.
Yeah.
So that you can really just appreciate being back in Salt Lake now.
Well, that was my question is, here you are, you're young, you're like, I want to get out of Salt Lake. I got to get out of Utah. But then you come back.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, you know, you love it, obviously. I mean, and been back for a little while.
Yes.
What got you to come back to Salt Lake?
So on the road, I had met my now husband in Chicago, and I quit to marry him. And then I had a child. And I lived in Chicago at this time. And when Anthony was a year old, that's when A Chorus Line called me back. And so this is interesting about being a woman and the generation that I am. I got off the phone and I said to my husband, I said, look, I am a wife. I'm a mother. I can't go do this on Broadway. I can't. He said, pack your bags. We're going.
Good for him.
I know.
Man, you have been surrounded by the most supportive, amazing people. That's incredible.
I know. If he would have agreed with me.
Yeah.
My life would have been completely different.
Wow.
So here we are. I'm with this 1-year-old going to New York. And the first time I was in New York is when they did a makeover for me when I became Cassie on the road. And my eyes were like this big. I mean, the city was just like overwhelming and so exciting. And so I lived in Queens and then commuted to the city. And but so we were there, and then when the show closed in,
now what show was this?
This is A Chorus Line still. So I had an 11-year career. You know, I quit about 5 times, but 11-year career with this show, which really is instrumental in what I do now.
Sure.
You know, when you look back on it. So when A Chorus Line closed in 1990, I wanted to have another child. And so my girlfriend said, you're so good with makeup. I'm a makeup artist at Bloomingdale's. Why don't you go do that? So I said, fine. So I went to the Lancome counter, which my mom uses, and I got hired.
At Bloomingdale's.
At Bloomingdale's. And I would not be here right now speaking with you today if I didn't have that experience, because I still, even though I taught myself how to sing, how to act, how to say my name, I still was very much an introvert. And if I didn't know you, I wouldn't talk to you. But Bloomingdale's and all those women that I would have these intimate conversations with while I'm putting makeup on them. And then if I didn't have somebody in my chair, I had to talk to strangers and pass out all those pamphlets or perfume or whatever. And is now why I can run Salt Lake Acting Company, be the host of the theater, get to know my subscribers and my audience, and have these really intimate, kind of really great relationships without being around each other.
Because of that experience.
Doing that. Yeah. So my husband's from Chicago, and he became a New Yorker in the 10 years we lived there. After I had my second child, Jeff and I were watching TV, taking care of our kids and working. And I said, we could do this in Utah and I could be closer to my family. It'd be easier to raise my children. And so this is the most ironic part of it. My dad had this lot in Bountiful that was kind of near him, and we were just starting over, basically. And so I said yes to that, thinking being an adult in Bountiful would be better. So we moved back to Bountiful. And here, I left this street. We lived in this home in Jackson Heights, all these Swiss chalet type homes, Tudor homes, that the only block that was like this. My neighbors were immigrants from Ireland, from Germany, from Thailand, and we were family on this side of the block. I didn't know anybody across the street, but on our side of the block, we were family. So I moved to Bountiful, and once people did come visit, but once found out that we weren't Mormon, it felt like, you
became really isolated.
Yeah, very isolated. I do have lovely neighbors that, as the years living there we were there for about 25 years, that became, closer to family. But I was there and raised my kids and near my family, near my parents, was able to take care of them when they were sick and got old and died. But it was when my dad died, all of a sudden I was like, what am I doing in Bountiful? So I have moved to Salt Lake. And I live in this great block that reminds me it's up by the U, so much of my New York block, and the relationships that I have with my new neighbors are so different. But what I learned after my parents died, one of the most important jobs out of everything I've done was to be a good daughter. I didn't know that about myself because I was the independent one. I have 2 older brothers and a younger sister. I'm the only one that moved away. So I thought I was so independent, so not so connected to them. But that was a realization that was huge.
Yeah.
You know?
Are they still here in Salt Lake?
My sister lives in Bountiful and my 2 brothers live in Farmington, but my parents passed away.
Yeah.
So,
it's probably nice to be close to family though. I mean, at the end of the day, you trade off all the big city life and all of that to be close to family.
Yeah.
And now you love Salt Lake.
Now I love Salt Lake. I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Well, it's also a different city today.
Yeah.
Than it was in, say, even the early 80s, say even in the early 90s.
It is. So we moved back here in 93, end of 93.
When did you get involved with the Salt Lake Acting Company?
So I didn't know what I was going to be doing here. I was freelancing for Lancôme. So I would go to all the department stores and pass out perfume or do makeup artist stuff. And a friend of mine who knew me from college, I contacted Susie McCarty, who was my talent agency when I lived here before, and said, Susie, I'm back. So she started sending me out on some commercials, and a friend of mine in college saw my name in the slate. You had to kind of sign in. So he wanted me to choreograph a number. He was working on a play at the Egyptian, and I've never choreographed before, but I was bored and I said yes. And so I called my friend, how do you choreograph? So she kind of told me how to start to get involved. And then he said, I'm doing a play at Salt Lake Acting Company. It's a musical. Would you choreograph it? I said yes. And I ended up, at that time, Salt Lake Acting Company was going through a second kind of rebirthing. It almost closed its doors. And so at that time, there weren't that many people auditioning for the Salt Lake Acting Company. Alan Evans and Nancy Borganick were the new leaders who write Saturday's Voyeur. So Richard had to be in the play. And so I had to kind of co-direct it. That's a whole new, I've never directed before. And that's how I got to know Al and Nancy, and they needed a choreographer for Saturday's Voyeur. So I said yes to that. And then I started choreographing for them year after year. And in 1998, they got a grant to hire someone. They hired me and Val Kittle to obtain and retain 4,000 subscribers. And so I said yes to that. I didn't even know what a subscriber really was.
That's amazing. You're just like, yeah, let's do it.
Yes.
Every opportunity that comes your way.
Yes.
That's amazing.
And then from that on, I was working administratively, and then whenever I choreographed Saturday's Foyer. So
you've had a lot of roles with the Salt Lake Acting.
Yes.
And now what is your current role with them?
My current role is executive artistic director.
Which is what? For somebody who's not familiar with that whole community.
A lot of theaters have an artistic director and a managing director. And there are a few theaters like ours that have an executive artistic director or a producing artistic director, which I handle the money side and I handle the artistic side, which I absolutely love because sometimes when you have a managing director and I want to do this play like Silent Dancer, what we're going to do next month with a cast of 10, it's a new art form where the language of dance tells a story equally as words. And then kind of have to, if somebody said, well, no, because that's too expensive. I don't have that problem.
Yeah.
But I do have to kind of go, okay, can I raise money for this?
You have
Is
to
this
convince
possible?
Yourself.
Yes. Which I absolutely love.
That's so cool.
Love. Yeah.
I was mentioning, I think before we started recording, Cynthia, how we have a lot of listeners that haven't been to Salt Lake yet, moving here. This is going to be a basic question, but how would you describe the Salt Lake Acting? Because there's not just acting classes. It's actually, you go there for the theater, to see plays like Saturday's Voyeur
Right.
or whatnot. How would you describe it to a newcomer?
So we produce new contemporary plays, and we have produced new contemporary plays since 1970. Ed Griska was the founder, and he's from Chicago, and then he taught school at Highland. And he and some of his students founded Salt Lake Acting Company.
Back in the early 70s.
Yes.
Though.
Doing plays that shocked people in New York, going, Salt Lake City wants to do that, my play, Turds in Hell? Sure. And they also did Hair when it was still on Broadway. In those days, getting rights to plays was easy. You know, you could just ask for it. And people were blown away that this small theater company in this conservative culture was doing work like that. And we have kept that. We've kept that authentic voice. And what I love about it, and a lot of people that come from out of state, these are their words. Salt Lake Acting Company's a breath of fresh air. They feel that the best word I can say is that authentic voice. We don't censor ourselves, and that everybody is welcome kind of feeling. I've heard that Salt Lake Acting Company makes living in Salt Lake City bearable. And the audience that we have, I love them. I go to other theaters and I miss our audience, and I'm trying to put words to it. Because we're in Utah, we're kind of diverse in color, but not very much. But we are diverse in age and economic status and education. I go to some theaters that produce work like we do, and they all look like middle-aged donors. They all are rich and they're old, and our theater really has quite a diversity in.
So it's a very accepting place to go if someone were to want to get involved in acting or figure out how to join Salt Lake Theater Company. How would someone get involved?
So we are a professional theater company, and we mostly produce. We don't really do acting classes.
Okay.
So if you are an actor, that you could contact us and we would put you on our email list. And then whenever we have auditions, we send it all out into the world. And, but we can give you resources of where great, you have a daughter?
Yes.
Well, yeah,
yes. Well, when she gets a little bit older, she should go to the youth theater at the University of Utah. Penny K. Wood is the executive director, and she directs all our children's show. So this is another thing. So we do these new contemporary works, which are mostly mature for mature audience.
Right.
There's language. I can't even count all the F words that have been said in that building. And some people do count. They're like, how many F words are there when they call the box office?
Oh, for real? People ask that.
Yes. It's like they can handle you can handle 2 or 1, but you can't, know what I mean?
5's okay. 6.
Yeah. So in 2009, we started professional children's theater. So we put on plays that I would love to have you guys come next year. It's Pete the Cat. And we put on plays based on a book. So it's so exciting for a child to read a book and then see it come to life on stage. And we have these wonderful Title I arts education programs where we have children from schools come in for free to see the shows. And that's the other beautiful thing of Salt Lake City, that these schools, okay, at this time, it could have changed, but Benjamin Elementary spoke 83 languages. I did not even know there 83 languages existed.
Wow.
Washington Elementary School, which is right across the street from us, 55 languages. And so when you see our theater filled with all of these children that have come from all different parts of the world, and right here in Salt Lake City, it makes you fall in love with the city even more. I
want to go back a little bit. You were making a comment about Salt Lake Acting Company being around since the early 70s, right? Was there a lot of pushback from the local community? Was there a lot of challenges with that because you were a little more risque? You weren't the norm here in Salt Lake City. And you see things even today with things, and obviously if there's any sort of change, if there's anything a little different here, people freak out.
Right.
What was that like back then?
Well, I wasn't there, but...
Or even the 80s, I'm sure was tough.
Well, Saturday's Voyeur, which we have mentioned, was born in 1978. And it came out of Nancy Borgenicht and Michael Butters. Michael Butters was a return missionary, and Nancy Borgenicht's family is Jewish, and her parents used to write these shows called Follies, I think. So they would rewrite words to lyrics and put on these shows. So Nancy got inspired by, I think it's a song from Danes at Sea, and she just started rewriting the lyrics with Utah references, and then got together with Michael Butters, and they did just what A Chorus Line did too. They interviewed all these people that were a part of the church, who have fallen away from the church, and then Saturday's Voyeur, the movie, was just coming out. So it started as a parody to Saturday's Voyeur. And everything that they put into this is all come from people, the newspaper, real stuff. And the reaction to this play blew everyone away. Now, another ironic thing, I was getting ready to leave when a friend of mine says, you have to see Saturday's Voyeur. And I'm like, no, I'm out of here. And then I've made my career out of Saturday's Voyeur. Is so bizarre. So I had the opportunity to see the original Saturday's Voyeur, but I'm like, no. When that came out, so the cathartic experience for so many people, they were laughing, they were crying. It was huge. There were things that were spoken in this satire that was never to be articulated, and people were living through it and living through some painful moments in their life. So it was a way to say we're all in this together. Yeah, very. Yeah. But I heard there were bomb threats. I heard there were
just from this play.
Yeah. Letters were written. Salt Lake Acting Company, of course, doesn't get a lot of corporate support because of Saturday's Voyeur. Then they decided to do it again. And
again. And
this year it's going to be our 41st year. And we've had 5 generations attend a Saturday's Voyeur of a family. So it's also what's so cool too. And I think this is why we are so diverse in age too. The parents, when it's a rite of passage, when their child gets about 18, then they get to come to Saturday's Voyeur. So you see a lot of parents and children and family, and it's their summer party. And there's nothing like this in the nation. And this is where we get our audience for the rest of the season as well.
Isn't it rewritten every year?
Rewritten new every year.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. When musicals take at least 7 years to create. Yeah. So the writers have to reboot and start writing, and then we have 6 weeks to put it on. So it's amazing experience, especially for the actors. After you've been in a Saturday's Voyeur, I swear to God, you could do anything.
What time of the year is it typically?
It's in the summer.
Summertime.
So it runs from the end of June through September. So another interesting fact on this and Salt Lake Acting Company, after the Trump administration began, a Ghostlight Project came to be. And in the theater, there's a light that you turn on when everything is dark, and I didn't really know what that was, but it is kind of to shine a light and keep it safe. As Salt Lake Acting Company, we don't have the light on the stage, but we do open the windows. So there's always light, and it's just kind of a thing that I was raised in. So they started this project so theaters would say publicly and maybe become a safe place for all voices, all people, no matter what their color, their gender, for all. Well, SLAC has always been that. But I said yes to this project, and it was a great moment when we all in the nation at the same time lit a light. And so it was happening at the time that we were presenting Harbor Gate in February. And so in our host speech, we would talk about the Ghostlight Project. And you can also go down and write what you stand for. And we had a New York director, and she said to me, "Boy, it's really brave of you to talk about the Ghostlight Project to your audience." And I'm like, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, I know a lot of theaters in New York that would be afraid of losing funding if they would talk about that. And I didn't have anything to say to her. And then I thought about it and I went, whoa, the beautiful thing about Salt Lake Acting Company and because of Saturday's Voyeur, we're so used to, oh, this isn't for you. Fine. We'll find our people. We'll find our tribe. We'll find our supporters. We've never forced anybody or become anything different than who we are, which is, for me, incredible freedom.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there are a lot of people that do support us and the individual support and keep us going. And the children's show, we do now have corporate support, which is wonderful. So that's for everybody. And even our children's show, I think we show a really beautiful, authentic side that the children really respond to.
There's stuff going on there all year round, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, probably the website. Would that be a good place to go to check out, if they want to go see a play?
Yeah. And go to the website. You drive by our theater. We are housed in the Marmalade Hills Center, which was a Mormon ward house. It was built in 1890. It's got this beautiful Russian dome. It really is a great part of our experience. And we have people walking in that says, oh, I went to church here when I was a child.
So, and now I'm coming here for Saturday's Voyeur.
Right. So we've been in that building since 1982, and it's a beautiful building. And we kind of remodeled our lobby. At one point, when I was director of communications, my office was the bishop's office. And I always wondered, woo.
What kind of stories were told in here? Right?
Yeah. So where we live is just beautiful. And so, yes, the website is a perfect place to start. Also, then call us up. Come visit us. We'll give you a tour. We'll take you around.
I love it. Now, there's a few Salt Lake City related questions we like to ask on here. If somebody was visiting Salt Lake City, say this upcoming weekend, what would you tell them to do or check out? Is there I know it's kind of a vague question because a lot depends on what time of year it is, but if there's a building or an area of town or first thing that comes to mind, is there anything?
Oh, that is a hard question for me because I'm so inundated with Salt Lake Acting Company and,
so maybe come out and check out a play.
Well, yes. I mean, the thing about, I'm wondering where the best place that says everything that's happening, because so much is happening in the city that I can't keep up. I can't keep up with all the amazing restaurants. And in 1994, there were none.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And now so I even told my husband once a week, we're going to go to a new restaurant.
That's a great idea.
It is a great idea. I haven't done it yet, but there's that. The food here is delicious. The music scene is amazing. My son is in a couple bands and,
what bands?
So he's is Nick Fleming, and, the one that he plays with the most is Wicked Bears.
Okay.
I think they're playing tonight. I can't remember where. So I kind of know about all the music venues and everything that's going on. There's so much music here. And then of course the art and then the theater and then dance. But geographically, there's nothing more beautiful than these mountains.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you must go up to the mountains. And, but there is an amazing nightlife and you can get by with those stupid, ridiculous liquor laws. You can have a drink. It may take 4 drinks to what you're used to in San Francisco for one.
Or pregame and then go out, right?
Yeah, right. Oh, and then.
Get an Uber.
Yeah,
Get an Uber.
Exactly. Take an Uber. That's one thing we have to really tell people that just come here.
Well, yeah, with the new DUI laws are ridiculous. Come on.
I could have a headache and be pulled over.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
It's ridiculous.
True.
And I want to touch on that too, just a second. I don't mean to get on the DUI thing, but it's not that I'm advocating drunk driving by fighting back. It's just silly that you could barely get away with having a half a drink almost and get a DUI. Mm-hmm. It's I just wanted to clarify that.
The energy spent there is ridiculous. Exactly. I mean, what it was before probably was really great. You know, I don't know how many drinks we could have had. Probably at least 1 glass of wine.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it just makes people afraid to come and spend their tourism money here, and anyway, that's the whole thing.
Yes, that's a whole thing. And then also the energy to try to clean up the air, please, instead of worried about liquor.
You were mentioning places to eat, how you you want to go out to a different place. Is there, I like to ask this people that come through, 1 or 2 favorite local eating spots that they like.
Yes.
Is there one or two that you would recommend?
Yes. So Red Iguana, and especially all the artists that come visit us at Salt Lake Acting Company, they've heard of Red Iguana already from other people that have visited Salt Lake Acting Company. So Red Iguana is lovely. Of course, I love Mazza, the Mediterranean food. Red Rock, the breweries. You know, all our breweries here are really...
We have some good ones.
We have some really good ones. I love the Italian salad at Canella's. So I do have a lot of favorites that I go to, and but there's so much more that I can't keep up with, and isn't that great?
Well, I think it's absolutely great because there's just so much diversity here when it comes to food and new places popping up. You don't have to go to your regulars.
The only thing that sucks is you can't make it to all of them.
Yeah. You can't make it to all, not enough hours in the day.
Yeah.
Now, what would you change about Salt Lake City if you could, or are you fine the way it is?
Well, we've tapped on a little thing. A little bit of it, it's not a little thing, is the liquor laws. I would love to change, and I would love to change the air because I have a dear friend that was in a chorus line with me from the beginning that just got out of New York. He'd lived in New York for 40 years and wants to do more in the theater. And I said, come out to Salt Lake City because another thing I love about Salt Lake City, you can make and be whoever you want to be here. I truly believe that. And I'm a perfect example. And so with that, telling my friend, come here, you'll be able to, if you want to be a director, you'll be able to be whoever you want to be. And he said, why would I want to go out there with that air?
Yeah.
And that just broke my heart. I think those are the two things I would change. I love being here, living in New York where it was so diverse. We just kind of went along our ways and we didn't have to care so much about things because it was so diverse and things. I mean, I don't know what it's like to live there now, but what I love here, it's like the like-minded people find each other. People love to gather. There are beautiful organizations to be a part of. And I truly love being here, which is so bizarre from where we started in this podcast when all I wanted to do is to get out.
Well, we all were. I mean, even I had to get out for a while, experience something else. And so I think that happens to all of us, but we all come back, right?
Yeah.
Like there's something about Salt Lake City that pulls us all back.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think we all have to experience it on our own time.
Yeah, for sure.
I've had a heck of a conversation with you, Cynthia. And I know we just skimmed the surface with everything. I know we kind of jumped around. You've had a lot to talk about. You have a lot of roles, a lot of hats. And I can't urge our listeners enough to come and check out Salt Lake Acting Company, support them, tell their friends about it. Cause I mean, obviously you want to fill the seats up.
Right.
And, before we completely wrap this up, is there anything that you could think of that we didn't touch on? You're like, oh my gosh, I got to share this story or I got to share this. I don't know. Or is there anything you want to throw out, Christina?
Well, I have my final question.
Well, you have your final question, but before we hit that question, I don't know, or not. Maybe you're.
There is a play that we're presenting right now called The Cake by Becca Brunstetter that, she's a writer for This Is Us. And this is about
the TV show.
That show. So she's a writer. And that show, I don't like family dramas. I'm just like, but the writing in it's so layered and so interesting that it got me.
It's a good show.
Yeah, very good show. And she's done the exact same thing with this play. It's about a baker in North Carolina that can't get herself to bake the wedding cake for a lesbian couple. And Jen comes back to her hometown. Her mother had passed away and was best friends with the baker and asks her to bake the cake. And she's like all excited. Yes, yes. And then when she meets her fiance, she's, I think I'm busy. So it's a beautiful thing because you see both sides of the story and you see the heartbreak in Della, the baker, and also with Macy and Jen. So Macy's from New York and she's saying these people are wrong. And Jen is like, but I am one of these people. I am. So I understand why she won't bake this cake. I get it. I think there's a lot of that. How we have to live here in Utah is kind of so we don't lose our family or our religion. We kind of have to pretend we're this way when we're really this way. So you can kind of see how Jen works with that. And then also Della and her growth and being open. So Becca Brunstetter's mother she's not a baker, but is of the conservative view and would not have baked the cake. So Becca wrote this to show that these people aren't completely the devil and that there are two sides. So it's a beauty, and it's so funny and heartbreaking, and we're getting standing ovations. And this runs through March 10th. So it's a really great example. If you want to try us out once, this is a really good example of the work that we do. And the quality of artists that live in this city, we hire local as much as possible. Maybe like 5% we have to go outside if I can't find it here. But the artists that are here and making their home are amazing.
Do you want to throw your question out there?
Yeah, here's my final question. If you could leave our listeners with one piece of life advice or a motto to keep with them, what would it be?
I feel from what I have learned from my life is if I felt like I had to know everything before I took a step to do something, I would still probably be home in Bountiful doing nothing. But say yes. If you kind of have a little passion for something and or you're interested, the opportunity presented itself to you because you're ready for it. So don't be afraid. Say yes and just see it where it takes you. I've said yes, and then I got my training. I said yes. I read that book. I said yes. Okay, what do I need to do? So, and that none of us really are to where we think we need to be, so don't worry about jumping in and saying yes and being open to what's next. And what I love about Salt Lake Acting Company, it keeps me growing, keeps me educated, keeps me looking outside myself even more. And then I have to catch up. I think that's what I'd say.
Perfect.
Perfect place to end the show. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for coming and sitting down with us and doing the podcast. Great story. I always tell people too, let's catch up maybe a couple years down the road if this podcast is still going on, right?
Great. Yes, I'd love that.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Many thanks again to Cynthia Fleming for joining us on this episode of the podcast. All the links to connect with her and find out more about the Salt Lake Acting Company can be found on our website at iamsaltlake.com/372.
All right. Weekly recommendation time. Hey, this is the time of the podcast. I enjoy this. I enjoy sharing bits and pieces of my life with you guys. This is where Christina and I are going to share like a little bit of a recommendation, maybe something we've just discovered over the week, maybe something we've been enjoying lately over the last month or whatever, something we want to share with you all. So I'm going to go first this week. Usually I'm the bigger man. Well, I don't know, bigger man, but I'm the gentleman.
You're literally the bigger man.
Well, you're choking over there.
I'm choking. I'm good.
Anyway, my weekly recommendation is a book I am reading. I'm slowly getting through. I'm one of those type of people. I'm reading like 5 books at a time. The name of this book is Be Obsessed or Be Average. It's by Grant Cardone, which I've heard the name, wasn't familiar with his works until I started reading this book. And this book is me to a T, basically saying you got to be obsessed. There's nothing wrong with being obsessed with what you're into or what your job is or what your hobbies are. Be obsessed or you're going to be average. And who wants to be average?
Not me.
No. So anyways, Be Obsessed or Be Average by Grant Cardone. Check it out. We'll have a link for that if you want to learn more about it at iamsaltlake.com/372. What is your recommendation over there, Christina?
So my recommendation this week is also a book, and I'm blown away that you can read so many books at one time because I get completely absorbed in just one book.
Well, I'm not reading them like at the same time.
Well, right. Not literally, but
it's just like, what am I in the mood for today?
Right, exactly, which is cool. But I've totally been binging. So I recommended earlier a Brandon Sanderson book, and I finished that, and I was depressed. So I moved on to Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, and I haven't gotten into the Mistborn series until now. It's so good. And if you like fantasy, this is just a great series to get into.
Very cool. I'll check it out, but I don't like fantasy, so I probably will not listen.
More fantasy for me. That's what I say. That's going to do it for this episode. Don't forget to support our show sponsors, Five Wise Vodka and Podcasting is Easy. We have links for all of them under our website under the show notes for this episode, which you can find at iamsaltlake.com.
Hey, we love email. Shoot us a message. Say hello if you're listening. Maybe you're new here. Maybe you've been listening for a while. Send us an email. We love to hear from you. hello@iamsaltlake.com is our email address.
And if you want to send us some candy or cookies or anything fun in the mail, you can always send us letters and packages at P.O. Box 4412, Salt Lake City, Utah 84110.
You have a great week. Get out and enjoy the city, support local, and we're going to see you on that next episode.
And good night, Grammy.